This episode of Primitive Culture is brought to you by Audible.com, offering more than 180,000 titles for smartphone, tablet, and desktop. To get a free audiobook of your choice and help Trek FM at the same time, visit audibletrial.com/trekfm. And also by Enterprise in Space, an international program of the non-profit National Space Society. Find out how you can help science and education and become a virtual crew member aboard the NSS Enterprise Orbiter by visiting enterpriseinspace.org.
This is Tim Russ, Lieutenant Commander Tuvok on Star Trek Voyager, and you're listening to Trek FM.
Open your mind to the past. All this may mean something.
It's a primitive culture. I'm just trying to blend in.
Some people think the future means the end of history. Well, we haven't run out of history quite yet.
Welcome everybody to Primitive Culture, a Trek FM podcast all about our history, our culture, and how Star Trek relates to it. My name is Tony Black, and I've got this weird feeling that I've lived this moment before. I'm joined by Duncan Barrett. Are you getting a strange feeling, Duncan, that we've done this before?
I feel like I've been here before somehow, yeah. But I mean, but we were trying to find a place to record. I was leading Toadie on a wild goose chase around London, and I can't... not quite sure whether I've been to this place before or not, to be honest.
It's a weird sensation. Welcome everyone to Primitive Culture, a Trek FM podcast all about our history, our culture, and how Star Trek relates to it. My name is Tony Black, and I've got this weird sensation that I've lived this moment before. I'm joined by Duncan Barrett. Duncan, do you feel similar?
Yeah, there's definitely something going on here.
I think we might be stuck in a temporal causality loop.
How long do you think we've been here?
Possibly too long.
Could be.
I'm not going to keep doing this, guys. That's only once. But this is actually quite a special Primitive Culture. As you can probably tell by the helicopter going by, that we're live.
We are
sort of
live from a random pub/wine bar on the Victoria Embankment in London.
Yeah,
prestigious location.
Live from London, yeah.
Live from London.
Live from London is probably the easiest way to describe it, isn't it? We're in a little sort of alleyway with a table next to some really quite feels quite trendy bars here.
Yeah. I think so. Well, but basically my idea was that we'd go and find a quiet pub, and I had in mind somewhere that I thought would be very quiet, but didn't factor in that today was Remembrance Sunday, and therefore every pub in central London is packed with people in military uniforms remembering their fallen comrades.
Yes,
and downing
Starfleet
downing several glasses of Romulan ale while they do so. So we've been reduced to sitting outside in the street in this wine bar that's too trendy to attract the remembering types.
Absolutely. We've been kicked out of the mess hall.
Yeah, we have.
Completely. We're podcasting live, as it were, although obviously it's not live, it's recorded, but it's still in the flesh, because today we've got, and you may have heard this before or after this podcast, because it's a podcast all about time loops. Who knows, Duncan?
And you may hear it again.
Who knows? But our pretext is that it's our podcast on director's cuts, which we, like I said, you may not have heard, or you will be hearing soon, which will be with several other guests, and that's another one recorded live, which we'll be doing later. In a way, I hope this goes out after that, because it's really going to confuse everybody. Do you know what I mean? Or before that. Have I confused myself?
Or both.
Help! We're stuck in a temporal causality loop.
Just keep releasing these 2 episodes for the next 17 years.
17 years, yeah. We thought when we knew we were going to do the director's cut episode. There's a lot of helicopters, isn't there?
There are, yeah.
There really is a lot of helicopters. I don't know what's going on, but. Oh God. Maybe Khan has broken loose. Could be. They're looking for him. But no, we were when we decided to do a director's cut episode based on the fact that tonight you and I are going to see The Wrath of Khan director's cut premiere in London with a few other Trek FM folk. We decided, what else can we do? We're meeting up a bit earlier. We're going to have a drink. So we had a few ideas, but then after the Star Trek Discovery episode, magic to make the sanest man go mad. Have I got that right?
I think that's right.
I have, haven't I?
Yeah. And it's not even in Latin.
The only episode not in Latin, basically. But yeah, we thought, you thought actually, it was a good idea of yours, let's do an episode on time loops, which is something all across fiction, and I think it's fair to say that we didn't expect a time loop episode of Discovery, did we?
I certainly didn't. No, I was thrown for a loop by this episode of Discovery.
Very good.
I mean, I don't know what you thought about it. I just watched it again for the second time this morning and really enjoyed it. And I enjoyed it a lot the first time, but I think the first time I was quite thrown by it because it's not what we had come to expect by that point. I suppose the episode before, Lethe, was also a bit...
Is that how you say it?
Lethe, isn't it?
Oh, I don't know. I've been wondering. I've been wondering for ages. You're probably right. I've been wondering for ages. But yeah.
Well, anyway, that seemed like a little bit of a departure, but at the same time, you know, it kind of made sense because it tied into Burnham's backstory and the relationship with Sarek, and it answered lots of questions that sort of needed answering in a way. Whereas this one was very much a sort of random romp. It could have been from any series. I mean, it could have been almost an episode of Next Gen. It had its Discovery flavour to it. I mean, the way that they took that story and the things they did with it, obviously, you know, you could see that this is a new kind of Star Trek, this is a new kind of TV in a sense, but definitely it's not what I was expecting. And I was actually really pleased because one of my big concerns about this sort of hyper-serialisation of TV that we have nowadays, and the fact that Star Trek was going to come back in this very serialised form, was that we were going to lose those kind of sort of random episodes, really. You know, whether it's kind of the comedy episodes, whether it's the kind of... you know, not to say that you can't have the morality plays in a serialised structure, you can, but the kind of those very sort of self-contained, perfect little, you know, mini plays almost, that we might kind of lose some of that. And I think it's been quite encouraging towards the latter end of the first half of this season of Discovery that we have seen a few episodes that have kind of stepped away a little bit from the ongoing story arc and done their own thing and sort of proven that it has... They've made it more Star Trek-y, I suppose. They're kind of tied into some of those things that we're used to. Yeah,
that's how I kind of felt really with it. I watched it and I thought, this is the most recognisable I've felt the show is yet.
Yeah, definitely.
And it was my favourite one. I think Lethe... There you go. Is the you'll correct us, guys? I'm sure if we've got that wrong. But there you go. I think that's the strongest one overall for me so far. But I think Magic to Make the Sanest Man Go Mad was the most fun, and I think it was, like you say, it felt the most Star Trek. It felt the most tuned into that kind of storytelling because it has that, you know, classic sort of science fiction element to it, but it is also a little bit funny. Harry Mudd, much as he's a little bit, I suppose, darker in this incarnation, he's still played for comedy. Yeah. You know, there is still that comedy. And the ending of that episode is pure 1960s, where he ends up with the Baron, who comes in, and his daughter. Yeah. I mean, that is the most 1960s sort of retro sort of thing ever. I think they've done. Definitely. So I think, in that sense, I think it worked really well as a real kind of romp. But the key thing why it was so good, and I think why it sort of shows almost the evolution of how a time loop story can be done, is that it managed to do a lot of character work with Burnham and Tyler and, you know, Stamets and these characters. And that's not something you always get in a time loop episode, obviously, because of the very nature of a repeating set of ideas. Well, it's very much, I mean, if you do compare it to Cause and Effect, the Next Generation episode, which I think is actually a great Next Generation episode. I mean, a lot of people have said it's one of their favourites, you know, and it's very much a kind of... It's a mystery, it's an adventure. It's one of those episodes that's not really about anything kind of profound necessarily. It's just a good story, and it's a really good ensemble story, Cause and Effect, I think. And it plays to a lot of next-gen strengths. It has got character in there, it's got kind of charm, it's got the kind of mystery, it's got this idea of everyone working together. But you're right, it doesn't have what the Discovery episode has in terms of really tying this into a kind of meaningful, ongoing story. And also, I think, not just the relationship between Burnham and Tyler, but also the relationship between Burnham and Stamets. A lot of the nicest scenes in that episode are Stamets' scenes. I mean, in some ways, it's his episode, I think, because, you know, although he's kind of gone completely nuts, basically, by what he's been going through. Who knows what's going on? Which puts him in the kind of, you know, the Bill Murray in Groundhog Day role, in the kind of role of the guy who's going around, going through this loop, and the effect that has on someone mentally, which obviously is what the title kind of alludes to. But actually, it brings out this much softer side of his character. You know, we have these lovely scenes, the scenes that he has with Burnham in the corridor, where he's, you know, finding out she's never been in love, where they're holding hands, they're dancing together. All this stuff that, you know, really gives us a different insight into his character, I think, and a different flavour somehow to the episode than anything that we've had from Discovery so far. It's what I think surprises me. Well, yeah, I completely agree. But what I think surprises me is managing to do that in a story like this. You know, and it's because you'd think it would be harder in some respects, to write this kind of character story inside an episode that is hung on this very science fiction trope.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, for me, it's very cleverly written. You know, it's very cleverly put together, and it is very different from Cause and Effect.
It is, yeah.
Which, like you said, is not really about anything, and it is hung on that.
It's a premise. It's like
premise.
a Brannon Braga. It's a sort of classic Brannon Braga episode. It's a interesting kind of mind-bleeping premise, executed very well. You know, the story works very well. It's like a lot of his great episodes. It's kind of, you know, all the pieces are kind of moved around in the right way, and it's satisfying as a story. But it's not. Yeah, it doesn't have that kind of beating heart in a way that, in some ways, the Discovery episode does kind of add something to that, I think.
No, it does, because Cause and Effect is hung really on. You know, the beauty of that episode is that it's hung on one decision.
Yeah.
That's made essentially at the end, which is whether or not to go with what Data says or what Riker says, and that's the beauty of that. The whole thing hangs on that tiny little tweak.
Yeah.
And that's all it takes. It takes a little tweak. It takes that moment to go, oh no, don't do this, and that lovely idea that it actually wants not Data who's right, which I think is also the other thing they like doing in that. You know, normally Picard, but logically, is always going to go with what Data says, because Data can compute.
Yeah.
It more likely has the fastest, quickest, you know, easier answer of how it's going to work. And in this case, he's wrong. And that's why it's so good that it takes, you know, putting it through that loop.
It's interesting, though.
It's very good.
I think that I've always thought it's strange, the fact that it's the number 3, and the fact that the 3 represents the fact that he's outranked. Do you know what I mean? He's literally. There's an element where I think that episode is sort of almost saying, like, back in your place, Data. You know, this is the first officer, and his suggestion is better than yours. Yeah. Even though you're right, we sort of assume that Data's suggestion is going to be better because he's much smarter, and you know, etc. But ultimately, it turns out that Riker is the one who's kind of made the right call. And there is something. I always thought that was weird, because they're, you know, why is it these pips? It seems quite sort of random, and I get from a kind of real world perspective, it's because the number, you know, it allows more possibilities than if it was a word like, you know, will or whatever. Then it might. Who knows how that would how that would play out in this weird sort of unconscious way. Whereas the 3, it's abstract enough that I suppose it can play out in all these different ways. But at the same time, it does make me think, you know, from Data's perspective, why is that the thing that he notices? He notices these 3 pips rather than anything else about Riker or about the situation. You know, that's
an interesting way of reading it. Actually, it could be about status. It could be about rank. It could be about learning that sometimes Riker is right.
And what does it mean that Picard automatically discounts his first officer's advice and follows Data's advice? Data. You know,
who should be in that job?
Yeah.
You know, although I've got to say, watching it, I would have been really. It's a good job he's an android, because if I'd have had Riker's, you know, Riker manoeuvre foot with his crotch basically in my face,
who knows what he might have.
I'd have been really. Do you think he'd have done that with Ro? I'm not sure. It's just all the way over. So watching it, I'm thinking. You know,
bit of man spreading going on there.
Very the Riker manoeuvre, one of the Riker manoeuvres. But he directs that as well, doesn't he, Jonathan Frakes?
He does. He does a very good job.
Brannon Braga writes it, but he does do a really good job. It is one of the episodes I remember, actually. Of all the Next Generation episodes, it is one of the ones that always sticks in my head, because it's very simply done, very well executed, and I think what I liked about it, and this is something that Discovery didn't do, because I don't think it did anyway, because it's geared more towards being a story in itself. But Cause and Effect, every single time they clearly filmed it again, because it's not just the same delivery. You know, it's the same lines in many respects, but if you watch those loops again and again, you can tell they've refilmed those scenes.
And it's interesting, because apparently I was reading that apparently Rick Berman said they didn't want to reuse. It was a rule; he couldn't reuse any footage because people would think they were being cheap, basically.
Right.
So they did sometimes have several cameras on the same. So it actually might be the same
shots
being recorded, but from different angles, or from, you know, and obviously the editing and everything. But I mean, I think one of the things that's interesting about that episode, and that shows how well directed it is that it's not boring at any point. And there is a danger, I think, when you start repeating dialogue like that, it can get very boring.
Yeah.
And obviously, partly it's to do with finding different ways of presenting it. Partly, I think, like with the Discovery episode, there's a lot of fast tracking through stuff, so you kind of catch the end of a conversation that you've heard before, or the beginning of the next one, or whatever, and you kind of it's edited quite fast so that you speed through stuff. But you get that even, I mean, say in Groundhog Day, you get the same thing, but in a kind of for comic effect rather than kind of dramatic tension, where there'll be a scene that takes 5 minutes the first time you see it, and then you see the sort of 2-second version of that
very
scene,
rapidly.
and it's kind of the same things can happen each time, but at the same time it's like you kind of skip to the punchline almost of a joke in each occasion, and it kind of keeps that pace up.
They do that a little bit in Cause and Effect. I mean, they do actually replay scenes quite a lot in that, but there's occasional things like with Beverly in her quarters dropping vases or whatever she's doing. They only really do that once, and then you hear it off. When it's with another scene. But they don't rush through it in order to get tons and tons of plot in it. It's very carefully staged, so you notice the slight differences. You notice them genuinely putting this together, and so. But at the same time, by the end, you don't feel like it's a waste. You feel like there's been a good premise told. You feel like it's nothing. No one's essentially developed in terms of character, but you feel like you've got a well told story.
Yeah,
and obviously the punchline at the end being Kelsey Grammer.
Yeah,
kind of makes it worth it, doesn't it? Really.
Yeah.
And you get that nice little moment at the end where you realise they've been trapped for like 80 years or 90 years or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And they did a follow-up book, didn't they, of that, called Ship of the Line?
They did, yeah. I haven't read that, but
Captain I haven't really know, but I'm sure the Literary Treks guys could
definitely. Or the old Earl Grey guys, they were always talking about Ship of the Line.
There you go, Ship of the Line.
You need to get them back.
Get them back in. But what do you think it is? I mean, we'll come back probably to Discovery and maybe Cause and Effect, but what do you think it is about time loop stories, Duncan? I mean, because they're all over fiction, and they have been for ages, going back to like the Twilight Zone in the 50s and 60s, and films like Groundhog Day you've mentioned. Why is it, do you think, that they're so popular and they've stayed around?
I don't know. I suppose I think it's quite a versatile concept in some ways, in that you can play it. I mean, you can play it for comedy, as in Groundhog Day. You can play it for suspense. I mean, another film I was watching this week was Source Code, which is very kind of suspenseful.
Yeah, very.
There's also an element of. One of the things that's interesting about it is that it inherently lowers the stakes, which you'd think would be a problem, because you have people getting killed over and over again, and they're not really dead. And so, even in something like Source Code, that train blows up, 15 times or something, and you kind of know it's not quite final. There's an element, I feel like, watching a lot of these things, it feels very much like when you play a computer game. Do you know what I mean? And there's that element of, there's the kind of, yes, there's the tension, you want to get through this thing, but you die in a different way, and then you come back and you try again, and then you try again, and you try again, and you try again. But I suppose there are, like, looking at it more seriously, there are kind of more serious kind of metaphysical issues going on. I mean, in Groundhog Day, I'd sort of forgotten this until I watched it again this week. I kind of remembered all the funny, light-hearted stuff and the kind of Scroogey storyline where he becomes a better person and so on. But there's a really dark section in the middle of that film where he becomes very depressed, he kills himself multiple times, and it's sort of played for laughs, but at the same time you basically get this suicide after suicide after suicide, and it's only really where he's absolutely got to rock bottom that then he starts to sort of build himself up again and become this better person. It's not like, I mean, much more so than Scrooge in A Christmas Carol. He really, he becomes this sort of fatalistic, suicidal, desperate man. And you see that as well in, apparently I don't know if it's actually the first, but one of the earliest sort of known examples of this time loop storytelling is this story from, I think, 1990, so a few years before Cause and Effect, called 12:01 p.m. And it was a short story written by a guy who was published in a science fiction magazine and then made into a short film starring, funnily enough, Kurtwood Smith, who was, amongst other things, Anorax in Year of Hell. Ironically, someone who goes round and round in a time loop, in a sense. And basically, he's this guy. It's a very kind of, if you've read a lot of Philip K. Dick, it's very much that kind of milieu of sort of that kind of sci-fi story. He's like an ordinary sort of office worker or whatever, and he gets stuck in this time loop. And it's called 12:01 because he resets by 59 minutes, and it goes on forever, and there's no escape, and it kind of drives him mad. But at one point, he said something quite interesting in the story, which they use again in the short film, which is he says, well, at least it's an hour. I can do something with an hour. I can go and have lunch. I can do something. If it was 5 minutes, it would drive me mad. And then he says, if it was a second, that would be hell. And it's that idea that actually, which comes up in Groundhog Day as well, is it's kind of like, at first it seems like, well, this is quite exciting, you can't die, your options are open to you. Bill Murray in that film, he kind of makes the most of it. He goes and gorges himself, he goes seducing all these women, he does all these sort of inappropriate things, he gets in trouble with the police, etc., because he knows there's no consequences to anything. But at the same time, after a certain point, he's trapped in this sort of time bubble. And there's also this connection between the fact that in that film it's set in this small town where nothing really happens, and also where the only thing that happens is they have this ridiculous ceremony once a year, and it repeats, and it's the same every year, and it's been the same for 50 years or whatever.
Yeah.
So there's definitely this kind of theme of the kind of smallness of life and the sort of pettiness of life. And at one point, when he's out drinking with these two guys he meets at the bowling alley, he says to them, I think, I'm stuck in this loop. Every day's the same, nothing ever changes. And one of them says, yeah, I can relate to that. That's what my life's like too. And I think there is that sort of element. That's one way of looking at these stories, is they kind of capture something about the kind of routinization of daily life, particularly, modern. You go to an office, you do your job, you come home. There is that kind of repetition, the monotony, exactly, and how soul-destroying that is. And and look at, even in the Discovery episode, you get Stamets is basically being driven mad by it, because it's it's an inescapable. It's like a trap. It is like a hell. You can't get out of it. If you can't break the loop, you're trapped there forever, potentially.
And knowledge of it. I mean, that's the key thing.
Yeah.
Knowledge of what's going on. This is what the difference with cause and effect is, that it takes them a while for any of them to really, they equate it to deja vu, which is that classic feeling. And they say it in the episode, don't they? They say deja vu is when you only think that this is happening. This actually is to us. We actually are going through this, but it takes them a while, and then it ultimately takes sending messages to each other. In the loop. But the difference with Stamets is that he knows, and he is Bill Murray. He is in that Groundhog Day thing where he is living it, and he's aware, and that isn't changing. And then eventually Burnham gets in the same position where she becomes aware. So it's not like in Cause and Effect where they wake up and they have to learn it again in a way, or they know fragments, or they hear voices. This case, they wake up.
Someone knows.
They know.
For sure. Exactly
somebody knows. Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's not all of them, but somebody knows what's going on.
Yeah.
And obviously with Discovery, Harry Mudd knows, because he's instigating it, and that's the big difference. And that's something I haven't really seen before in time loop stories in that way.
The fact that there's an antagonist working it.
Yeah.
Although, funnily enough, in Doctor Strange you have that as well. Because,
that's true. That's true.
It's Doctor Strange who uses it himself to kind of trap the villain, in a sense.
Yeah.
But definitely the idea, and I suppose it affects it, doesn't it? Because with cause and effect, it's very much like they know once they work it out, they know there's this problem. They don't quite know why it's happened. They have to. It's very much like the salute. They have to solve the problem and get out of the time loop.
Yeah.
With Groundhog Day, really,
it's a learning point for him, isn't it?
It's sort of implied. It's like, it's kind of magic, isn't it? And he needs to learn a lesson, and it's kind of trapped him. It's like a spell that's broken at the end when he falls in love and becomes a better person or whatever. But exactly, it's whimsical. It's not. There's no attempt to explain it.
No.
And apparently, actually, the screenwriter of Groundhog Day resisted the studio when they wanted to make the film. They wanted to put in a scene where a gypsy comes and curses him to sort of explain what had happened.
Okay.
And he basically said, I don't. Yeah, well, exactly. But he was just like, I don't care. I don't. It doesn't need explaining. That's not really what the film is. That you have to accept that for the film to make sense, and you go along with it. You don't really care who has engineered this. But certainly with the Discovery example, the fact that it's someone actually doing it for a purpose, and it's deliberate, does make a difference.
It does make a difference. I've got to say, Harry Mudd's, whatever it was called, time something, wasn't it? He gave it a name. Time.
That thing on his wrist.
Yeah, the thing on his wrist. The time thing on his wrist.
The crystals.
Time crystals. Yeah, that's it. That to me, that felt a very Doctor Who kind of idea. Actually, it was something like a gizmo, a MacGuffin, a gadget that allows him to do this. Very, quite huge thing in many respects. Actually, managing to sort of reset and put things in a loop.
Yeah.
But in most of the other examples, like you said, it is usually an unknown sort of reason. It's not specifically
Or it's like in cause and effect, it's a sort of spatial phenomenon of some kind, isn't it? It's an interaction of whatever they're doing with this particular area of space, and it's kind of physical properties that has caused it.
And so there is a cause, but it's not really. Again, it's not really the point, and that is ultimately the point of these things. Is that there is. The point is always to tell another story. It's never usually about the fact that time is looping. It's more about what impact does this have on these characters. And I suppose that's where cause and effect is different, in the sense that it kind of is that they're just stuck in a groove.
Yeah.
And again, in some respects, you could say the same about the X-Files when they did one called Monday. And I think Mulder actually describes it as stuck in a groove.
Yeah.
Needle stuck in a groove. It's that idea that, in that sense, it's about a bank robbery and that goes wrong, and they end up dying, the bank explodes, and then the day repeats. It's the same thing you would get in all of these, and they play out similar scenes in different ways, where it's Mulder going to cash his wages or whatever, or
But the fact that he has to do that, and the fact that it's called Monday, I think is significant as well, because it definitely ties into that idea of the mundane. I mean, I don't think there's. Well, you can tell me, but I'm not aware of any other episode of the X-Files where Mulder has to go and cash a check. Do you know what I mean? It's like it's the kind of very. This is like the level of kind of mundane, and they spend half that episode in this really tedious meeting, which again is not something that we see really in X-Files. It's like that's something that we can relate to in our own lives if we have an office job and we have to put up with tedious meetings. And the fact that it has to be Monday morning, it's not Friday morning. It's definitely tied into that idea of the kind of cyclical monotony of every Monday morning is Groundhog Day if you're in a job that you despise.
If you're in that, and even for the most exciting jobs, and much as they're constantly beaten down by powers that be, they do have quite an exciting job.
They do.
They're off exploring all kinds of weird and wonderful stuff. But not every day is them going off and fighting an alien shapeshifter. Some days they have to cash their check, they have a very boring meeting about whatever, and that's it. They're not always doing these things, and that's what's quite nice about...
to do the filing. It's not filing going on in the office.
When does that get done?
Who does the X... See, that should be a spin-off, the X-filing. Maybe they've got a temp who does the filing.
Maybe. We've never met her, though. New series, maybe. Who knows?
There you go. You see, when they age out of the roles, they can work up to that one.
Oh, if only. But then, again, you don't see these mundane things.
No.
And I suppose that's what time loop episodes get, or time loop films get to do, is that they do get to show those angles. And I suppose as well, you mentioned earlier that sometimes tonally there's differences. Like Groundhog Day is played for comedy. Source Code is a thriller. And it is about. There's a lot of themes going on there about terrorism and stopping. That kind of thing. There's a lot there. And the exploitation of military people and all kinds of stuff going on in that film. It's a very, very different kind of message to something like Groundhog Day with the whimsy or the very science fictional needle stuck in a groove kind of thing. And so it's quite a varied genre.
It is
subgenre.
Yeah, no, it is definitely. I mean, I think it's interesting. Even cause and effect, I suppose you have an element of that kind of mundane level of daily life. You've got the card game, you've got Beverly cutting her plant. Everyone's sort of on their off hours, aren't they? And then in Discovery, you've got this party, which, I mean, it's kind of, that almost is, I suppose, an encapsulation of like Next Gen versus Discovery. Next Gen, they have a quite genteel card game around the poker table. There's a little bit of teasing back and forth, but that's as far as it goes. In Discovery, it's this really sort of, exactly. In Discovery, it's this kind of boozy, raucous, wild party, unlike anything we've seen in Star Trek before. It kind of shows you where we've come to.
It's more like Kirk in the bar in Star Trek.
Yeah, exactly.
09, isn't
exactly.
it?
Yeah,
yeah. He's cracking onto a hurrah.
But it's that same idea. It's people in their off time. It's the kind of it's the daily life. It doesn't actually happen in the middle of a crisis or in the middle of something major. It happens when Picard's reading his book and Beverly's tending her flowers and everyone's doing their own sort of thing. And then they kind of realise that
it is so different.
There's something wrong.
You describing that. Beverly's tending her flowers.
Yeah.
Nice little card game. Picard's reading a nice book.
Yeah.
It's all very sedate. Yeah. Whereas in Discovery, Tilly's like, woo!
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
And there's crewmen snogging all over the shop.
Yeah, I mean, surely some people must have had problems with that. I mean, it was a very 21st century party in a 23rd century setting. But again, it's reflective of reality. And
I liked it. I enjoyed it. But I think it's true. I think some people felt it was. People were like, why would they be playing these songs? These songs would have gone out of fashion. However many centuries before or whatever. I don't know. And I sort of get that, but at the same time, I don't really care.
But with that, would they? I mean, will they have done? I mean, I'm not entirely sure that in 2250 people won't still be playing the Beatles or Spice Girls or whatever. I suspect they might be because I don't think music is necessarily going to change that much.
But will they be playing them the way that we play Vera Lynn? Or will they be playing them the way that we play the Rolling Stones? Do you know what I mean?
I guess.
Well, I mean, that's the question, I suppose. And I do sort of appreciate... But at the same time, it's kind of an impossible... That's an impossible situation, isn't it? And, we see the same thing with, like, alien music or whatever. I mean, when Clara and I were talking about music in Star Trek way back, we were talking about, like, Klingon opera and all these sort of attempts to do alien music. It's sort of the same thing, like how... Yes, you can have a degree of... That is their job as writers to imagine stuff. but at the same time, in a way, like someone imagining futuristic music, that's quite cheesy and is going to date it anyway. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
pretty much,
what you
yeah.
think is futuristic music even just look at the set design or whatever. What you think is the future in the 60s compared to what you think is the future in the 90s compared to what you think is the future now. You know,
We never
there's
quite
no
get it
way.
right, do
There's no
we?
way. There's no way to get it right. It's going to seem dated anyway. So in some ways, maybe you might as well go for it and make it fun. You know,
Keep doing it, yeah, exactly. But I think, like you say, it does come down to different versions of that day, you know, and exploring that day, whether it's a party, whether it's a card game, whether it's a boring day at the office.
Yeah.
And I think that's what it is. I suppose it's that existential fear in a way, isn't it? What if you got trapped in the worst day you could? You know, what if? And everyone thinks that, you know, they all get to the end of... Sometimes you get to the end of a day and you go, oh my God, thank God that day is over. What would happen? How would you feel if you woke up and you knew you had to go through all that again?
Well, and also, in Groundhog Day, Bill Murray says at one point, you know, why did it have to be this day? And he says, you know, there was this day, you know, however many years ago, where he met this woman in Mexico and they went and had sex on the beach and all this stuff, you know, and he was like, why can't I live that day? But even if you live that day again and again, after a while, wouldn't it become unbearable? I mean, isn't it partly unbearable just because no one else knows what's going on and therefore you're kind of completely isolated? You might as well be delusional and imagining the whole thing because, to all intents and purposes, it's a bit like Beverly Crusher. Card again. A bit like Beverly Crusher in the Remember Me, you know, with it. I mean, even if she's right and everyone else is wrong, whatever the answer is, it's kind of like you're cut off from everyone somehow. Yeah. And I suppose the other question is, you know, thinking about the length of these time loops. One of the things that's interesting, I mean, cause and effect actually doesn't have a specific length time loop. You know, Magic to Make the Sanest Man Go Mad is 30 minutes. They've got a set time. Source code, it's 8 minutes. Groundhog Day, obviously, it's a day. 12:01, it's 59 minutes, basically an hour. Cause and effect, I suppose, is the odd one out in a sense, in that it's the ship exploding that resets the clock. And obviously the ship explodes at the same time, we assume, each time, but there's no awareness of that kind of clock ticking down and we're going to reset again and we're going to reset again each time. There's kind of, at some point... And that's why there's this sort of discussion about second-guessing ourselves. At some point, something's going to happen. We're going to make either the right or the wrong decision, and we have to try and do something else. And it's sort of the same thing that happens in all good things as well. With the anomaly, there's this kind of like, well, what do we do? Do we go towards it? Do we go away from it? Do we fire this thing at it? Do you know what I mean? What do we do? Because we know that we did it wrong before, but how do we know that we didn't know that we did it wrong before, and that's why we didn't do it wrong? You know, and it's kind of... That's the loopiness of it, I suppose.
I suppose that gets into the whole idea that, I mean, if you look at something like Groundhog Day, if you were to try and find a meaning in it, you could almost say that God is trying to make this man realise, you know, where he's gone wrong, and he's trapping him in this repeating day until he realises how he needs to change. You know, there's that great... I don't know exactly how long it is, but I'm sure there's that great thing that somebody's worked out that he's in there for essentially about 10,000 years.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, because he learns all these skills. I mean, that's one thing, and that's an indication of like what can you do with time. And I suppose that's what initiates his kind of coming out of this kind of depressive situation. Is that he decides to make the most of it almost, and he decides, well, okay, I can learn to play the piano, I can learn to... He becomes an ice sculptor, you know. And there is that kind of thing people say about, well, to be an expert in anything, it only takes however many, whatever it is, like 5,000 hours, or, you know, I don't know what the amount is, but so you could sort of time it based on that and work it out. And in some ways, I think that's quite relatable. I mean, I've just a couple of days ago sent my book that I've been writing off to the publishers to typeset. I was up all night on the last night, kind of desperately trying to claw, because I was trying to fiddle with this and tweak this, and so I can relate to that idea of not having enough time. And like, what would you do if you had kind of unlimited time? You could be anyone, you could do anything, and that's sort of what Bill Murray realises in that film. In a sense, is that he's not really trying to break the curse. He doesn't think he's even really aware that he might be able to break the curse. He's kind of just accepts it and decides to make the most of it, and that's what enables him to become a better person. But the other element is, you know, I was watching it with my girlfriend, and she said, well, he's basically grown up. And that's what it is. He's this very immature character at the beginning. And she was sort of saying, you know, everyone goes through that process as they get older. You know, they start off being quite selfish, and they start off kind of, you know, using other people. And do you know what I mean? All these kind of things that, you know,
you're
hopefully...
more oblivious to things.
Exactly, and you're more sort of self-absorbed and more kind of self-interested. And hopefully as you grow older, you become... You know, really with Bill Murray in that film, it's much more about by the end of the film, he's thinking about other people. He's not really living for himself. He's not glutting himself on food or sex or whatever it is anymore. He's trying to help different people. And he really, he's just living for other people by the end of it. And that's what seems to be able to kind of break the spell. And in a way, there is an element of that, I suppose, that he's sort of setting aside his childish, immature kind of personality to some extent and becoming more of a kind of... It was quite funny. I sort of felt watching, so he basically becomes Tom Hanks by the end of the film. He sort of starts off as Bill Murray and ends up as Tom Hanks in like any Tom Hanks film ever.
Yeah. It's true.
He's got a nice, folksy guy who helps people out.
Yeah, the kind of guy you want to meet.
Yeah, the kind of guy who could be in Star Trek. Yeah,
nice tie back to the Star Trek stuff. Yeah, but no, you're right. It is that whole idea of the moral side of it. If you had this kind of unlimited, opportunity to relive something and do, you've only got a day, but if you had that, what choices are you going to make? Are you going to make the right choices? Are you going to think about what you do? Are you going to do good things? Are you going to do bad things? There's a really good show that's essentially based around a time loop element called Daybreak. Have you ever come across this show?
This isn't like ITV's early morning programming, no.
Thank God, no. But I think I don't think they got the title from this.
Okay.
I'd imagine. I'd be surprised.
Yeah,
it's. I think it was from like 2006, and it's a really good, probably underseen in the UK show. There was one season, and it was essentially this cop played by Taye Diggs who wakes up to find his girlfriend has been murdered, or his wife has been murdered, and he's the prime suspect, and he has to try and figure out who did it. Every day, though, he wakes up and it happens again.
Right.
So, and every day he can't prevent her dying. It kind of starts at the point where she's dead, right? And all through the season, it's been a long time since I watched it. I tried to buy. You couldn't get it in the UK. I bought a Region 1 copy, put it in my DVD player when I got home from America, and it blew up. Probably a bit stupid of me, but I thought it'll work. It'll be fine.
This DVD will self-destruct before viewing.
Essentially, yeah. But if you can get hold of it, it's very good because it is that whole thing. He goes through an entire season of 13 episodes, and each day he remembers what happened before, and he has to try and piece together a conspiracy. But every day he wakes up and he sort of has to start again. And it's a great idea, and in that sense, it's about somebody who's accused of something terrible and having to prove he didn't kill her and find out who did. And it's a really, really inventive use of the time loop idea in an ongoing series. And it's a shame we haven't seen more stuff along those lines, actually taking the time loop concept and making it into a season or series-long idea. What could you do with that?
But without it being repetitive. I mean, that's always the danger, isn't it? Is it becomes repetitive, and which I suppose is why you do have to have techniques to kind of barrel through stuff. You do have to kind of think about the editing. You do have to think, how do I tell this story without it becoming repetitive and boring?
It's a challenge.
But, I mean, it's interesting. I suppose one of the things that struck me is, although, say, if you have this time loop, you have this idea of no consequences. So you can kill people. I mean, even in the Discovery episode, everyone dies horrifically several times. I mean, cause and effect. Yeah, exactly. Cause and effect, famously, that cold open to cause and effect is probably the best cold open in Star Trek. One of the best cold opens ever, because it's just so bold. And the only time I can think of they topped it was in the Enterprise episode where they blew up the Earth. And that was, that's Brannon Braga kind of basically topping his own record almost, I think, of like,
next stop the cosmos.
Yeah, exactly. But but at the same time, so the fact that there's no consequences, it means that any bad things you do you don't have to live with the consequences of them. So you can go and you can eat, like the woman says in Groundhog Day, you can eat loads of food and you won't get fat. You won't you're not going to suffer from it. You can do things that are illegal, and you might be in a prison cell for a couple of hours, but that's the worst. You can do something dangerous and get yourself killed, and you'll wake up the next day, etc. On the other hand, actually, anything good that you do also gets wiped out. So, all these people that Bill Murray is helping, he has to help them every day because he helps them one day, and then if he doesn't do exactly the same thing the next day, they're going to die or lose their thing, or, the dog will get run over, or whatever it is that he's helping them out with. So there's that weird... That almost becomes a kind of trap in itself of like, you might think, oh, okay, I've got all this infinite time. I can do, I can help people in all these different ways. But every day that you don't help that, you help this person, you're not helping that person. And what are you going to do? Which, again, I suppose you could see as a sort of metaphor for life. You have to make these decisions, and you can't do everything. You don't have unlimited time. You don't have unlimited opportunities. You do kind of have to make these decisions one way or another.
But you'd feel a real sense of futility. I mean, and like you said, you get to that point in Groundhog Day as the example. You'd feel that real sense of futility. That what is the point?
Yeah.
And I suppose that's why. Time is one of the most... The very concept of time is one of the most interesting things about existence and about life itself, which is why people play with the idea of time so much in fiction, because it is a fascinating idea. It is that idea, what would you do if you had all the time in the world? What would you do if you had a day to repeat? But if you found yourself feeling like there is no point to anything, then that's a big existential problem. What is the reason to keep going? One of the reasons that as human beings we find that reason is because time is in a line, and that there is ultimately an end point, and that you wake up tomorrow and it will be a different set of circumstances. Even if you have that same mundane week, and every Monday you go and cash a check, or every Monday you have that meeting, that meeting isn't going to go exactly the same way every week. There will be differences, there will be inflections.
That's true.
Even though you are stuck in that routine, you're not stuck in the groove, and that's the big difference, isn't it? Really?
Funnily enough, one of the things I really liked about that X-Files episode Monday is that it doesn't play out exactly the same each time. Whereas, say, Cause and Effect is very much the emphasis is on, the glass always breaks and so on. And, yes, they realise stuff, so obviously that changes things slightly.
But a lot of the lines are the same.
Exactly, a lot of the lines are the same. And you see that in Discovery as well. It is like a loop going around. Whereas in the X-Files episode, there's this kind of interesting sense that they're variations on a theme. So even something like you see the guy write because he's robbing a bank, you see him write the note saying, hand over the money. And he sort of writes it slightly differently each time. And, things like Mulder his waterbed springs a leak and he gets water everywhere and he traipses around his apartment, bashing into things and causing mayhem. But the way that happens slightly differently.
Changes.
Do you know what I mean? Does he trip over this thing or does he fall on the kind of... And even the dialogue, it goes along similar lines, but there are maybe different jokes in there or whatever. And I quite liked all of that. I mean, obviously it's a way of keeping it fresh and avoiding it seeming too repetitive. But there's something, I suppose, that kind of counteracts the idea of this sort of fatalistic, existentially alarming loop effect. The fact that even outside of the things that the person who's aware of it can change, different elements seem to just, I suppose, just like a raindrop going down a window or something. It could go this way, it could go that way. Maybe if you reset time, it wouldn't do the same thing again. I don't know.
But you always end up at the same point.
You always end up at the same point because the kind of bigger forces, I suppose, are going in the same direction. Yeah. But within that, there's some degree of free will and some degree of kind of random chance, I suppose, is key to a lot of these stories. I mean, I think that's why you see this idea of playing cards. That's why you get the poker game in the Next Gen episode. Because the playing cards represent what should be a totally random sequence. They've been shuffled, and they even talk about it. Data says it's a totally random set of cards or whatever.
So then when Beverly starts going for...
it proves that something is wrong because the randomness has failed in a sense.
And that's true. It's interesting how the different kinds of time loop sort of stories do these kind of same things in a different way. The X-Files one does have the different scenes, ultimately getting to the same point. Cause and Effect does have very similar dialogue, and it takes different reasons to get to the same point. It's a very elastic subgenre, and I think that's why I think it made sense. They didn't have to do that. I mean, with Discovery, they didn't have to do that in the first 9 episodes. We're early on, and I think one of the big issues I had with Discovery at the beginning, and I'm starting to feel better about now, is that it's taken a good half season to get to the point where I feel like it's Star Trek in new clothes. I felt like it was new clothes, but I didn't always feel like it was Star Trek. And I feel like now we've reached a point where, as we go into the season mid-season finale, which will be coming out today in the US, or as we record, or tomorrow for us, it feels like Star Trek. And I think an episode like a time loop episode, which is, there's not one in every season, in every series. There's not one. Amazingly, I don't think there's one in Voyager. And if there was going to be a show,
right.
that did a time loop episode, you'd think it'd be Voyager. But
they did. What about isn't there a time loop? Well, no, I was going to say where that very early episode where Janeway and Paris are in those sort of orange outfits.
Is time again?
Is there a time
maybe.
And there's an explosion that's going to happen, or it isn't.
Yeah, but I don't know if it's.
But maybe it's not a loop. Maybe they just go back once.
There's something about time travel in this city, in this planet.
Yeah, but you're right. It's not, and I think that's the other thing. Is there's lots of time travel stories where even say like Terminator or something like that. But I think the loop is...
Or Year of Hell, where there's that
exactly,
one
where
loop.
there's that... Yes, exactly. It is one... Yeah, you're right. It's one loop that is...
But that's more of a reset button, isn't it?
Exactly.
It's not so much a loop as a reset button.
Whereas I think what's interesting about the loop is this idea that if it's not resolved, it will just go round and round. And it goes on, millions of times, potentially.
Yeah.
I mean, look at, Kelsey Grammer being 80 or 90 years or whatever out of sync. It's kind of...
That would have been, hundreds of thousands at least times. Well, even more, depending on how long they were stuck in it. That there wasn't. I don't. Much as you said, and you're right, that there wasn't a suggestion of an exact time period for the cause and effect. It didn't strike me as being a whole day. That struck me as potentially.
It's quite a short window.
Yeah, maybe. Because Beverly wakes up in the night. I'd say that goes from say maybe about 9 p.m. when the poker game, maybe up to say 8, 9 in the morning, maybe a 12-hour loop because they
have their meeting at 7, don't they? Yeah.
So you can assume maybe there's a couple of hours before they encounter the anomaly. So I'd say it's about 12 hours, roughly.
Yeah.
It's not a full day. So in theory...
That's interesting, yeah.
In theory, if it had been a similar thing for the Bozeman's crew... 2 times a day, 365 times, 80 years, that's getting on for 160,000.
We need Dr. Bashir here.
I reckon it's about 160,000.
Unless you've got a calculator with you.
My mental care. I am genetically engineered.
Yeah.
But it's a lot. Basically.
It's a lot of things.
And it is that idea of after that,
And what kind of deja vu were they suffering by then? Because I mean, if the next gen crew, they'd been in there for 17 days.
But they didn't even know anything was wrong. So that's a bit of an.
That is weird. Yeah.
He was like, what? Very confidently, it's 2278.
Yeah.
Like he wasn't going, we're all crazy. Which in theory he should have been. He should have been like, oh my god, should have been a dribbling mess, rocking in his chair at that point. So I suppose you've just got to take that as a little bit of dramatic, license. But then again, there are no rules in a way with this kind of story. It's the concept behind it, isn't it? It's not necessarily underpinning reality in inverted commas rule. It's more, what is the point behind telling this story? And that's the irony, in that a lot of the times, if you were stuck in this groove, you would feel like there was no point.
Yeah.
But there always is. There always is a character point or a moral point or a theoretical science point that underpins why you're telling this story. And in the case of cause and effect, for instance, it's that as we talked about, it's that idea of the slight variation that can change an entire situation for 2 crews, not just one.
Yeah. Well, then I suppose if you want to look for a kind of moral of those stories, it's that you can get out. If you're in a rut, you can get out of the rut.
Yeah.
You can think your way out of it. You can decide to change something. I suppose in all these stories, there's a situation where it appears that people have no agency or have no control over their situation and they're stuck in it. But one way or another, somehow they do get out of it.
Yeah.
And even Groundhog Day, he does sort of break that curse eventually. Even in source code, it has this slightly confusing happy ending, because even though he's been told that he can't alter the past or whatever, it sort of seems like he has.
Yeah.
And there's this kind of, certainly it's, they escape from that kind of hell. Unlike, funnily enough, 12:01 p.m., which is this short story that supposedly kicked off this whole thing, is a very bleak kind of traditional sort of sci-fi, more like sort of Twilight Zone, Outer Limitsy kind of story
where he never gets out of it.
No, and basically the end of the story, it's become a hell for him. He can't bear it. He has a heart attack and dies, and at least thinks, at least I'm dead now. And then he wakes up the next morning. Same thing happens to Bill Murray in Groundhog Day. He kills himself, but eventually he gets out of it. Whereas in that story,
there's no suggestion he's going to get out.
No, it's just like, and it's this awful thing that actually it's happening. And he says basically it's this physical thing. It's happening to the whole world. The whole world is going through. It's called a time bounce. But he's the only person on the planet who is aware of it. Exactly. And it's that, like you were saying, it's that knowledge. It's not so much what's happening, because what's happening for everyone else is just kind of, they're unaware of it. But he's got this knowledge which is just going to destroy him. And he can't even kill himself to escape from it.
There's no escape.
Yeah.
It's a very fundamentally bleak existential idea.
It is,
play that
definitely.
like that, isn't it? It really is that existential fear of, what if I'm trapped? And because it would feel like a hell. And I suppose that's where you do get that bigger sort of cosmic idea of, as I said in Groundhog Day, is this God teaching this guy a lesson?
Yeah.
In the other one, is this guy in hell in 1201? Is this essentially what hell would be? Not even reliving a terrible moment of your life, just reliving nothing.
Yeah.
Like reliving just pure boredom, or reliving, that hour. Imagine reliving that hour where you don't do anything at home.
Yeah.
Where you're just sitting there doing nothing, right? right? And we've all had hours like that where you're not necessarily zoned out, but you're not doing anything really. Imagine reliving that hour forever.
Well, it's also just being detached from other people. I mean, there's a novel by Joseph Conrad called Nostromo, and one of the characters in that is this quite sort of urbane, sophisticated character, and he gets sort of marooned on this desert island, and basically he kills himself after, I think, 3 days maybe. And Conrad says in this, the narrator says in the story, basically he kind of lost confidence in himself, in his own existence as a person, because there was no one else around, because he was cut off. And, and in fact, he would have been rescued, shortly afterwards or whatever. But it's that kind of idea of, like, the fact that the person who's aware of something in that way that no one else is aware of, and that they can't affect, that he can't affect anything permanently. Do you know what I mean? If you're in the time loop, because whatever you do, even if you convince someone else of what's happening, the clock will come round and they'll forget it all, and you'll have to do it again. And it's just the kind of futility of that nothing you do, which I suppose is a metaphor for life, isn't it? Does anything that we do ever matter? Does it live beyond us? Even if we leave some kind of legacy, it'll be forgotten in however many generations. Even if it's not, even if we turn out to be Shakespeare, the sun will explode and we'll all. Do you know what I mean? Once you get into that sort of existential cosmic scale, everything does seem very futile. And I suppose it's that kind of
existence is futile, not resistance.
Very good.
There's that title for the
existence is futile.
That is it. It's a big cosmic idea, which is often played out in nice sort of morality play terms, or in Discovery's case, being quite a knockabout romp, really. In many ways, which is why it was so enjoyable. I think.
But a romp that allows you to see other sides to characters and allows you to, in a way, because it lowers the stakes in terms of the danger of death, because people aren't really going to die. But it also lowers the stakes in terms of, because like Tyler kisses Burnham and he says this doesn't mean anything, which is quite a weird thing to say to someone when you're about to kiss them. But at the same time, you kind of get the point. He's like, I can take a risk. I can kind of, we can throw ourselves into this because we know it's not going to lead to anything. We're going to forget about it anyway. And also, I think those scenes, like I said, with her and Stamets in the corridor, there's a kind of he's very affectionate and friendly towards her, and maybe that's just because his personality's changed and he's gone a bit mad anyway. But also, there's an element of like they can afford to be more vulnerable. Somehow they can afford to be. There doesn't have to be this kind of guard up the whole time because it's all going to be wiped out anyway.
Exactly. So it's oddly enough, it takes away some of the fear of life and that natural trepidation of should I do that? Is that how are they going to perceive that? Am I taking a risk basically?
Exactly.
And every day people are afraid to take risks in whatever form. You take away the consequence, then you accentuate the risk. So I think it allows. I think it's really good for writers that you get to play that way. You get to play those extra scenes, you get to play those different scenes that you would normally do in an episode, really, or in a standard drama. And I think it worked well for Discovery where it was placed. I think it's done the series a lot of good, actually. Having that time loop episode. So,
and also it's good that they know that it happened, I think, because that's also the danger with you get those kind of reset button episodes or you kind of loopy episodes. Sometimes you have, and then no one remembers it and no one knows, and it might as well not have happened. But the fact that you get that scene at the end where they're like, Stamets told us everything that happened. A bit like, I suppose, you have with yesterday's Enterprise, you have like Guinan telling Geordi at the end what's happened, and so there's that kind of it meant like even if they don't all remember it, at least they are aware of it, and so it's kind of it's there. It's something that means something. Because I think the danger with time travel is that everything can become very kind of relative and very kind of. This was one problem that I had with the whole temporal Cold War storyline. Once you get into this idea that things can just be wiped out and this can, and you see it in Year of Hell, I suppose, in a way, there's a danger that it does to some extent just destroy dramatic tension because, dramatic tension is built on the idea that things have consequences. And, we might say, okay, Star Trek's always been quite episodic and things didn't necessarily follow through from week to week. But at the same time, you couldn't kill a character off one week and then just forget that you'd killed them off the next week or whatever. Do you know what I mean? There's a maybe...
Tashi Yar.
But they had to come up with a convoluted explanation for that at least.
I don't think they ever mention her again.
I would see, right, okay, Well,
I know what you mean.
I think there's a danger that it can kill that. So you have to sort of be careful with how you deal with that kind of thing.
You do.
And that would be my worry, I suppose, when you were saying about like doing a TV series with this premise every week. I can see, like, structurally, I can see the appeal of it, and I can see it would be a challenge that maybe people would like to get their teeth into. How do we not? But it's like part of the challenge is how do I do this and not make it boring?
Yeah,
which
very.
worries me.
Yeah.
Like, you know, you're watching something, you're like, wow, they've done it again, and it's not boring. You know, I mean, how long is that going to sustain?
Daybreak was really good because
Right,
it did manage to do that.
Yeah,
they really did. They found a way to actually tell a story in that style, which was really compelling. And that's when, by the end of it, you were like, wow, that was not easy to do.
Yeah.
You know, and that's the thing you always get with the best kind of time loop stories, and Groundhog Day is a good example of it. They are very complicated, but you never feel like they are. When you're watching it, you feel you don't really. If you think about the intricacy of how it was written and plotted, they're so dense and complicated, but they make it look easy. Yeah. There is a natural ease to it, and I think the best ones do that really. And it is a really, really compelling subgenre. So you never know. Maybe we'll get it again in Discovery. Maybe Harry Mudd will return with his time, whatever it is.
Time crystals.
Time crystals. I keep forgetting time crystals.
Yeah.
His magic time crystals.
Yeah.
But it's been fun. Anyway, talking about time loops, Duncan. It's been fun talking about time loops, Duncan. It's been fun talking about time loops, Duncan.
It just gets better and better. You know, that Stuart Lee joke that, you know, if you repeat something enough times, it becomes funny, basically. Yeah.
I've been doing that all my life.
Right.
We'll either be back or you will have heard our episode on Director's Cuts live from London. But that's not all that's been happening on Trek FM, or I'll talk about time loops this week. So let's have a little look at what else is going on the network.
Previously on Trek.fm, the 602 Club.
I know, I went all in. I think if it came up short, I think there was going to be a lot of screen caps with a lot of people. I think even on podcasts, I've been throwing it all out. Oh, this is going to be one of the best. Trust me on this one. Yeah, Thor 2, ignore that. This one will be the bee's knees, as it were. So, yeah, there was a lot of pressure. Right? I don't think just on Marvel and Taiki Waititi, but on me, myself, with my audacious claims.
Warp 5.
I tweeted John Billingsley last night while I was watching this episode. I'm like, I gotta admit, if I'm alone on the ship, I'm walking around naked too.
Okay. All right. So that was like my next question, just getting that. And Brandon's already answered it, which, you know, I thought that would probably be his answer.
To the journey!
I always want to know, why haven't they done a Guardian of Forever movie in general? For me, that's like such a cool go-to concept.
Yeah.
Like, if you're going to make a Star Trek movie, get the Guardian of Forever in there. That would be awesome. And no one has ever thought that was cool enough to do yet. So we're doing it.
Yeah, I mean, it never really gets reprised that much, does it? Except, obviously, in the animated series. We do get the Iconian Gateways later, which are a similar sort of concept, aren't they? But
not the same.
Well, they don't talk back to you.
I don't think you can travel through time with those, can you? I think they're more just space.
The final frontier. These are the... Oh, sorry.
Meta Treks.
I'm feeling a Star Trek Stranger Things mashup where Spock starts playing with the lights on the Enterprise and Captain Kirk strings a bunch of Christmas lights around his quarters, and
that's actually what happened in that episode of The Next Generation when there are the dark matter pockets. That was actually Spock just messing with him.
And that's what else is happening on Trek.fm.
So check out all of these shows and join in the conversation about your favourite corner of the Star Trek universe and beyond. You'll find us wherever you get your podcasts. If you're an Apple user, be sure to hit the subscribe button in Apple Podcasts on iPhone, iPad, or Apple TV, or the desktop iTunes app to get the latest episodes as soon as they are published. And please do leave us a star rating and a written review at the same time. If you're not an Apple user, we've got you covered as well. You can find our shows on Google Play Music, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spreaker, SoundCloud, Windows Phone, and in most third-party apps, and you can stream and download the MP3 file from our website or grab the RSS link. If you'd also like to help us keep all our shows coming to you each week, you can become a patron of the network on Patreon. Visit patreon.com/trekfm, that's patreon.com/trekfm, to get all the details. Perks include early access to episodes, exclusive content, producer credits, and more, available through our special patrons website, the Patron Zone. It requires a great deal of money to produce, host, and distribute these shows each month, so we really appreciate any support you can give us, and we hope you'll join the team. Again, you'll find all the details at patreon.com/trekfm. Duncan and I would love to hear your thoughts on today's show, and there are many ways for you to get involved and do just that. The best place to join in the larger conversation is the Babel Conference, our listeners group on Facebook. Just type Babel, B-A-B-E-L, into the search field on Facebook, and it should come right up. If you'd like to send us an email, you can use the form on our website at trek.fm/contact. You can also find the network on Twitter at TrekFM and on Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM. You can find Duncan and I on the Babel Conference as well, and you can find us both on Twitter, Duncan at Barrett's Books, and myself, Tony, at Black Hole Media. And you can also find me hosting my own podcast, the Xcast and X-Files podcast, if you type that into Twitter and Facebook. So thanks everyone for listening to this episode of Primitive Culture. We'll be back soon to discuss more history, culture, and how Star Trek relates to it.
You're blended all right.